All
All
right,
right.
welcome everyone to the Sprocket Pod. For those of you who are tuning in and don't know who we are, my name is Cameron Collins. I am one of the hosts here, one of the community managers of Sprocketeer. I've got my co-host Mark Lerner.
Hey guys, Mark Lerner, co-host of Sprocket Pod, director of growth marketing at Deal Hub.
We've got our guest Brian. Brian, go ahead and give yourself an intro for everyone.
Hey everyone. Yeah, Brian do a bunch of different things, but main focus is partner over at White Raven, so doing a lot of just fun kind of stuff.
Yeah, and for those who maybe you're tuning in from YouTube or Spotify and you're not super familiar, we're all members of the Sprocketeer community. It is the largest independent community for HubSpot admin. Make sure you check us out. Join the community in Slack if you're not already a member. We've got almost 2,000 HubSpot users and super fans in there helping one another out. So really awesome place to be.
Pretty sure
First
we're gonna
opportunity
hit
I had.
2,000 today, actually.
Yeah, we're right there. If there's
Yeah.
any listeners and you're not in there, go be the 2000th person, and we want to celebrate you.
How far
Yes.
we've come, right? I mean, wow.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember when we were in Discord, and there were like four people who would log into the Discord on a daily basis, and it was a very slow moving place for help. The four people who were active were on there very regularly, but now it's like I log in daily and I can't keep up with
Yeah.
all of the communications. So Brian, I know you're on top of things. I don't know how you do, but I admire it as much as you are on top of things.
I mean, I do the best I can. I do the best I can, same as you. But yeah, like you talk about the Discord has me flashback to like I just go back to that. What was it, like 2 week period where the three of us were just like, should we move to Slack? Should we not? What's the pros and
Yeah.
cons? And we finally did it. And weren't sure if it was gonna work.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I
that was some
I
good
I was
times.
like 50% chance that we have a handful of HubSpot people that boycott being on Slack just because it's on Slack.
Yeah,
But we did it. We did it, and we're here, and now we're at almost 2,000 members. And
we're bigger than we
I don't want to
were.
say, yeah, yeah, we're bigger than we were and more active than ever. So,
Mhm.
We should play that
super
Celine
excited.
Dion song. It looks like we made it. That should be the next intro next week.
Well, and not only have we grown so much, but like one of my goals, which Sproggeteer is a community that's bigger than myself, but like one of my goals has always been to see the community grow to a place where come inbound, we'd have a bunch of people who could get together and
Mhm.
feel kind of like friends rather than just like this vague, not even coworker, because we don't really work together, but this person who I might talk to on occasion
Yep.
online. And I don't know. I mean, inbound's around the corner, so I'm curious to hear not only how you guys feel, but for anyone listening that wants to chime in, how people feel about that, like actually meeting in person and being friendly with all these people that now many of you have been talking to for probably over a year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super excited. I know that last year was the first time I met a whole bunch of people, you included, who I've kept in touch with and grown pretty close to. I also know that like planning for these big events, when you say we're going to meet up, we're going to meet up, maybe like 20% of those things happen because it just gets so crazy. So I'm
Hmm.
also tempering my expectations.
Well, I
Not a bad.
remember
It's not a
last.
bad way to put it. And yeah, oh man, if I could go, I would. But yeah, much needed travel time.
Yeah. I know that for a lot of the people who are going, and maybe for some of you who were there last year at Inbound, again, we were in Discord at the time. And so there was a lot of communication through Discord and through texting and just private messages. But it was like a handful of us, maybe five of us. I know Emerson was there and
Mhm.
Colin and a few of us like went out for pizza one night. A lot of fun. First time
Nice.
I had an opportunity to meet a lot of the people in the community at that time, but it was very disjointed. Whereas now we
Mhm.
have a really great channel dedicated to it. Again, just so many more active people, and I hope that for everyone who is attending Inbound, it becomes a really special experience for those of you who get to meet up with one another,
Oh, yeah.
which will be really awesome. Now,
Oh, it's
Brian,
fantastic.
obviously, yeah. I know you're really busy in the community. You do a lot with Let's Build Media, with White Raven. You're in the Slack channel on a daily basis, helping everyone. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about objects, events, properties. And I'm curious to hear your take on the split between these various elements of HubSpot and, really utilizing them and utilizing an instance in just a proper way.
Oh yeah, and I'm glad we had this conversation. The timing worked out just because like the last few weeks, just with everything that has been launched over on the enterprise portal, focused on custom events and interactions there. Just it really got this conversation going for a lot of people who I've been talking to. Just like, okay, well, what is an event? And traditionally speaking, you have this conversation with marketers, and it's just like, oh yeah, like a webinar or a podcast or like a literal event, which is like, look, technically you're not wrong, but that's not exactly the focus. But yeah, it led to a whole bunch of different questions about it that I've been fielding left and right, and so it's just inappropriate to just let's break them down into each one of the buckets, and we kind of see where the conversation takes us from there. So I'll throw that back your way. Which one you want to learn more? Which one you want to learn about first?
Well, let's start big and talk about objects,
Yeah.
because I think that this is one of the elements where not only is it so fundamental to the CRM, but nailing and understanding the use of not just the basic objects but custom
Hmm.
objects as well is really important. And I mean, you have um, criteria for making sure it's mutually exclusive, and I mean, you can look at it from that lens for should I set up a custom object, but
Hmm.
um, I've been seeing a lot of buzz in the space about the usage of custom objects to really push the boundaries of what HubSpot can do now. And it'll
Hmm.
tie into events uh, as a property, if you will. But one of my favorite uses for custom objects is where I've seen, for example, Happily has created
Hmm.
their app event Happily for
Yep.
managing actual events in HubSpot, and it uses custom objects.
Yep.
So I think
We
there's
use that
so
at Let's
many.
Build. It makes total sense. It works great.
It's crazy like how versatile the CRM has become. And I mean, objects at a macro level, right? It's like the big bucket for the rest of the data. But when you're thinking of should we use a custom object or not, like how do you decipher, do we want to open the floodgates for a new object in
Mhm.
HubSpot, or does an existing object fit the bill? How do you go through that thought process?
Yeah, and that's a good question to keep in mind because, uh, honestly, for those of you who are like less familiar with it, let's just kind of get a brief definition out of the way. But essentially, just objects in HubSpot are just data structures. That's bluntly all they are. Think of them as a folder on a computer, and then within the folder you have individual files, and the different kind of file types. One of them is a property, and the other one is an event. The difference there is a property stores specific pieces of information. So things tied to contacts, tied to companies, deals, or maybe individual specific custom objects. Versus an event is really just tied to a specific activity or something that occurred within the portal. And so your object is comprised of a combination of these two things. So what it is and when it happened, and so, with that foundation put in mind, defining whether or not to create a new custom object really boils down to does it like it's does it make sense? Like, is there something that already exists that is close enough to what you're trying to accomplish to justify creating a new one? Because if there is, there's no need because then you start falling into the victimization, just like overusing properties, overusing events, where have a one to one relationship versus a one to many. And so, I'm using that to kind of talk about like individuals who use different custom properties for every single physical event they attend. So if there's like if there's a conference in LA one day, that's a new custom event, and one in Boston 2 weeks later, that's a different custom event. Instead of just use one event with a drop down property, and you just add the line item under it in order to associate which specific event you're coming from. And so, like, I know that's a bit of a longer winded answer to your question, but it really boils down to, do you need it? And if so, how can you simplify it? Because the more complex you make it, that's just going to be that much harder for you to reconcile within your database, as well as draw an effective attribution model.
Yeah. What could in your experience we mentioned one, but what are some kind of good examples of custom objects that really made sense as a custom object?
Oh yeah. Like Cameron, you mentioned like how Happily is using event management. It's like that's a perfect example of a custom object. If you're doing an event like we're doing right now, where you have these live casts going into play, you have a custom object for everything that is the live cast itself. And then you have the events which are tied to maybe they trigger when you send out the social post or when someone signs up for it or comments on a LinkedIn post, whatever have you. And then the individual properties themselves are associated with uh, one can house like the stream recording link, for example. One of them can source the link, like the various different LinkedIn social posts that you originally sent out to promote the event. Maybe one of them ties to the actual individuals who are going to be attending the event itself. So could have all three of our names as unique identifiers within there, so that it attributes all of that up to the event that is HubSpot 101 objects, events, and properties that happened today. And
Yeah.
so, like, that's just one quick example, but like, really, it's thinking about what if I have a specific thing that I want to associate within HubSpot, should it wrap into a larger folder or does it stand alone? And if it stands alone, that's where you probably want to start thinking about a custom object. If it wraps into something larger, you probably don't need it.
I think another example that is somewhat common is when you think about like physical structures. And
Mhm,
so, should it be a custom object? And if we think about the real world and real estate agents or companies that represent buildings in HubSpot,
yeah.
oftentimes because those buildings are their own entities and you can have
Hmm.
so many unique buildings within um, an account, if you will,
Hmm.
oftentimes you may have those represented as a building's object.
Hmm.
And there could be an argument that, well, this falls as an address under a person. But
Hmm.
again, it depends on the use case where are we representing the building itself or are we representing the person and its building?
Yeah.
And so, depending on how these real world structures play into what you're trying to convey in your data, really you can have two answers to the same question because a building can be an address under a contact object or it can be its own object with its own record. And it just
Exactly.
depends on what we're using the data for, which doesn't make for an easy answer.
And in that use case with the real estate, that plays into the dynamic content generation through the CMS, right?
Hmm.
You create unique objects for each building and you basically kind of automate the listing. You create it once and it'll generate, using a template, it'll generate hundreds based on all the objects you have. And that's something I think is really unique about HubSpot.
Hmm.
And kind of the calling it the CRM at this point, I think is a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, we're really beyond that now, right? Where it's really just like a
Oh, yeah.
database. Yeah.
We're way beyond that, because
Yeah.
like I still have sitting conversations with people who are just like, oh yeah, it's only for marketing, or only, or maybe it does some sales. Like there's still plenty of places that treat it as a glorified email marketing tool. It's just like, oh, it's a replacement for Emma or MailChimp. Like there's much more to it.
Yeah.
And like there's two real categories for that, where it's like I've been putting together like an approach to kind of share out and get more folks on board with that, since HIPAA's become more accessible, and that's really just for a combination of like veterinary as well as medical practices, because those two spaces, like I know, have a lot of frustration in different tools. Yes, you may need to, you're leveraging a tool internally for like Epic for your actual managing of patient data. However, when you're just managing the actual scheduling and general information tied to that person or your pet, like HubSpot's this combination of like the custom object properties and events a perfect thing. So using a vet practice as an example, similar to what you just did for the real estate industry, Cameron, it's like your custom object is just tied to the actual family, like familial dynamic associated with the vet practice. And so, you know, Cameron, you have your household, and that is your custom object. Your properties are associated with the pets that you own, and so dogs, cats, birds, whatever you have you under that. And then each time you come into the clinic itself, that's where you start tagging these different events. And so when you have those custom events, it's like, okay, well, made an appointment, attended the office, actually had various different tests run, and then maybe a prescription was assigned. All of that can be an event related property. Or honestly, you can work around that with custom properties itself if you're not on the enterprise tier. But just showing the power that the three different buckets that we have here, you can use them across all kinds of industries. It's just how you're thinking about it.
So objects is the largest container, and then we
Yeah.
have the events and the properties. How do you go about thinking through when do I use the event versus the property
Mhm.
uh, item in HubSpot?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And it ultimately boils down to how frequently do you want this to update? And for me, I look at it as a property is something that I'm going to be updating once or maybe a handful of times. Event is something that I'm going to be looking at updating quite frequently. And so a good example of that would be lead source. And so when you're interacting with a new business and you first come into their website, uh, and you come to that website through an Instagram link, that's a perfect use of a property because it tells you this is where you originally came from. Anytime you navigate that website in the future, like you don't, the company no longer cares about that lead source because they only care where you first came from. Y- Those additional times you come over to the website, that's where an event is a perfect opportunity because it's showing, hey, this person navigated the website, this is where they came from. And then each time that fires, that is then more data that you can model in order to determine, okay, do people who are coming from Instagram as lead source, for example, do they come and maybe that's the only time they come to the website versus people whose lead source is, say, I don't know, maybe a Reddit ad. They have a few dozen events within the same week of that first interaction that shows, maybe we should be spending more of our time, energy, and effort on Reddit instead of Instagram just because we're having that many more events fire.
And so one of the differences here being that for those who maybe are less familiar with the usage of events, but they track historical data better too, right? So if somebody goes to Instagram and you log that, well, with a property, traditionally you would log it and then yes, you can see what the property was,
Mhm.
but you can't look at that property and see all of those different really chronological values. Whereas with
Right.
the event, you can see they went to Instagram, they went to Facebook, they went to the Reddit ad. Now they're a customer.
Yep. And you can create that entire journey in data mapping, which is why they're so powerful. And for those of you who are just like, hey, I can't get on the enterprise tier just for whatever restriction, there are workarounds for it. And so honestly, all that workaround is just you just create a series of custom properties that are all calculated that are, lead source equals Instagram. Every time someone comes in through that, it just ticks up, and you do that for the various different models that you're not models, the sources that you're coming from. And then you just run an automated workflow that whenever someone lands on your site, lead source equals this, you just append that property. And so there are ways to work around the custom events using properties, but from what you're already hearing me say right now is it's a lot more to it than just saying, hey, look, I want to run this event. I want to run this event in this certain instance. And then you just have all of the data.
It definitely
So,
makes comparing historical pieces of information a lot better, a lot easier, if you
Right.
will. And when setting up a CRM, I mean, saying this as a general statement, a lot has changed over the past 3 months,
Hmm.
6 months, 12 months. So for those who maybe have been using HubSpot for quite a while but aren't very familiar with events or some of the more recent changes, what are some of the things that you've seen change over the past 30, 60,
Hmm.
90 days or so that have either made events better and more accessible or more
Hmm.
helpful? Or what are just some outright newer features that you found to be helpful, which maybe people aren't utilizing and should be?
Yeah, and there's quite a few of them, and honestly, keeping track on them every single time is like that's a hard place to be. But that's where I would, recommend like that's what we do. That's our intention on Let's Build. Like that's what we try and talk about multiple times every day. And Chris does a great job of getting all kinds of different people onto the show in order to showcase that. In tandem with that, I know Kyle's show that he does pretty much every single Monday has a myriad of data updates that are coming along, not data, but just like system updates for HubSpot that are extremely relevant there. And so I know this fire hose of information is it just kind of keeps coming. And that's something that's something we're working on fixing. So stay tuned on that. But that's something it's a challenging place to be. But the one thing I can say to actually answer your question instead of just giving vague nuances is that there's quite a few, but I would say one that I'm most excited about is the data mapping tool, which was recently introduced. And if you don't see it or haven't used it yet, you just pop over, go into your data management menu, and then at the very bottom, there's something that's called data model. And in that, you're essentially able to see your objects, your properties, your events, and show how it all interconnects. And if you're ever like confused or just not necessarily remembering what we're talking about today, you open that up, it'll give you a quick crash course. But not only that, it's also an incredibly powerful place to just check your data hygiene and understand how are my contacts doing, how are my companies doing, deals, so on and so forth. Is the data intact? Is it associating appropriately across the various different objects and properties? And if there's any breakdowns there, you can reconcile it and navigate directly to the areas that need fixing. And even while you're in there, you can remap where data is supposed to go uh, in case your organization evolves. And so, like a good example of that is you create a new custom object that is tied to uh, like podcasting, like what we're doing here, for example. 6 months you're no longer doing it, you now have this empty custom object that you're like, maybe I don't want this as a custom object anymore, and you convert it over into a property. The data modeling tool will let you do that.
So the data modeling tool, for those who aren't very familiar, not only lets you visualize your data, but it actually lets you affect things in HubSpot. And so if you want to
Yes.
make a change, you can pop into the data model tool and actually make edits to the architecture of your data, not just a visual representation of what currently is.
Absolutely. And I know generally not the biggest fan of doing just that quick share screen, but just I'm going to throw that on just for you all to see it really quickly so you can see what it is that we're talking about. But like this is just kind of in a demo portal I have, but this is all the data modeling is. It just shows here are the objects in my CRM. Here's what I have in sales. Here's what I have in activities. And then as you hover over each one of them, it shows where and how, like you see these lines kind of popping up in the background, how everything is plugged together and associated. And that's just immensely powerful for so many reasons. And you have that, like I was showing that to you in the demo portal. And that demo portal is on free everything. So it doesn't matter what product you're using, doesn't matter what tier you're paying for or not paying for. You have access to this tool, And that is a huge amount of value, especially as you're getting started, just to make sure that you're mapping your data appropriately.
I think one of the things that made me really love HubSpot within the past week even more was I had seen a product manager who went on the page and someone was complaining about a feature where it was enterprise only, and
Hmm.
the PM had gone in and said, well, yes, newer features can be enterprise only, which HubSpot can do what they want.
Hmm.
But what I loved was that they then said, but we usually will go in and as those features become older, we move them into the lower tiers.
Hmm.
And I mean, I don't think that's like a surprise statement for anybody that as features become
Yeah,
older, they become part of the less expensive tiers, and features that are newer you've got to pay for.
yeah,
But it was just a reminder that they really do listen to their community, and their people are watching feeds like
exactly.
this.
Which is why the new pricing model came out. And I know there's a lot of mixed reviews on what all of that looks like versus, pay by hub versus pay per seat. But honestly, the pay per seat is very much something that is it's not geared as much towards like that small and more established business. But I can tell you for a fact that it is a significant help for people in the very small business or the solopreneur or just startup mentality where you want to have access to these tools and features because bluntly you need them in quotes, but you don't want to be spending 500 bucks a month on a pro level hub for something that you're like, I don't need 5 seats for this, I'm not using it enough. But if I can have a seat just for me and my business partner at 120, absolutely. Yeah, I would do that and then I can start building everything out the way I want it to be. And that's so valuable because then you're starting everything off from a better seat than you would be otherwise. Because I know you guys have seen this as well. Like, how many times have we all run into the problem or worked with a client or someone who's been using HubSpot for 1, 2, 3 years, and it's like some of the stuff that's newer is pretty clean and organized, but that foundational stuff is just a complete and total mess. And you need to rebuild all of that. And what's the answer for why that happened? Because they were gated to those features and couldn't build it right the first time. And if you're able to have access to the tools and resources to build it right the first time, I think that's going to eliminate or at least reduce a lot of those growing pains that like small to medium sized companies get that happen once you hit that 500,000 ARR, that 1 million ARR, that 2.5 and that 5. Like those different tiers that you kind of run into over the first like 5, 10 years of your company, like those are huge pain points for so many different businesses.
Yeah. It also makes the notion of switching from all these different hubs to buying a seat or two just makes the decision of upgrading a lot more simple because I no longer have to go and figure out, do I need to upgrade Sales Hub? Do I need to upgrade Content Hub?
Mhm.
Maybe I need one feature in one hub, but I need three in the other. And it becomes very confusing for a lot of people. And even
Mhm.
for as long as I've been working with HubSpot and using different accounts, it's very hard for me to be able to oftentimes assess and compare. And I think that's something that we see, especially for a lot of accounts where they're questioning, should I upgrade? Should I downgrade? Should I keep my account the
Mhm.
same? And they want a price comparison of
Mhm.
what am I currently paying for? What's the level up? What's the level down?
Mhm.
And they want to see it for all the different hubs.
Yep.
And it's just
And
very hard to get that analysis.
and even harder to test it. And so like when you're testing and trying to make that decision, that's why I'm a huge advocate for demo and sandbox portals. And essentially all of those are blank portals at different tiers. Most of the time they have all the enterprise features, but you can't necessarily use them live per se. But there's a lot of things that you can do in there, almost everything you can do in a native HubSpot account, which is incredible because you're able to test a lot of the things that you want to be working on, or potentially be exploring. And if you're not sure how to do that, just if you just literally go into your HubSpot portal and request a demo account, you can get into one. And if you have a HubSpot developer account, it makes life way easier. And if you don't, you just join the HubSpot developer group and then request access to the demo portal. You don't need to have developer expertise, but it gives you it's a free gateway in to getting a demo portal with a lot of enterprise features. And the luxury of that is, yes, while there may not be all of those features available to you, even at a pro level, being unlocked at that enterprise gives you the opportunity to try everything and understand, okay, is this something that I can make do on my current level or on pro, or do I really need enterprise? And make those decisions accordingly. Uh, Custom events are a perfect example of that. Like if that is essential for your business and you don't want to do the workaround, like you're going to be adopting enterprise in one way or another. But that's
No,
also the luxury of being able to mix and match the hubs, because you may do enterprise for Content Hub and then free your starter for everything else. And that's fine. You can do that.
I think it would be fun with the amount of updates that come out, if we almost created an Uber portal, which
Hmm.
not only had all the enterprise features in the sandbox instance, but all of the alphas and betas, just
Hmm.
ungate everything and turn it all on.
Hmm.
Maybe we should do that as a segment. Come in and just turn everything on and do a
Hmm.
review of what the heck just happened.
Yeah.
Um,
That'd be fun.
because there's so much.
Yeah, and I would love that to be the case, because as a as a HubSpotter, I used to work for HubSpot. I left there about a year and a half ago. But when you are a HubSpot employee, you get access to you have your own portal, and it's enterprise completely unlocked. You have everything that HubSpot has to offer, as new and as old as it can be. And that is immensely powerful in so many ways for you to do your side hustle. It would be absolutely incredible to just have a feature like that available, at least in, like, maybe not a productized setting where you're able to run your business on it, because like you're giving away HubSpot for free at that point. Uh, but at least giving a full sandbox feature where you can maybe have a full live version of the account, but it resets every 30 or 60 days, so you can't get too established on it and just keep running on it. And then you can, to your point, we can show what all these bells and whistles and features are. You can play with them and have a whole heck of a lot of fun, in the same way you would when you're getting like a Google Analytics certification. You get an unlocked account of Google Ads.
Yeah. I'm convinced that companies that have HubSpot experts or HubSpot super admin, I think now we're almost to the point where you need to hire someone full time that just fields all the updates and tells the
Hmm.
admin, here's the update that you want and need. It's
Hmm.
just things move so fast. There was the one recently, they released the beta for reporting against and tracking changes to properties,
Hmm.
which
That happened magically on
historically,
Thursday last week, and that no one
yeah,
knew about. Yeah.
yep. And historically, we had built or tried to build a custom object to track property changes so
Hmm.
we could see anytime reps change deal amounts. And it was this whole workaround. And lo and behold, we now have
Hmm.
a beta for it. So the amount of things that get rolled out, I mean, it's amazing, and the amount that they've invested in their product team, it's just so amazing to see not only how rapidly they move, but I love the fact that in the terms and conditions for the beta, anytime you enroll, you're consenting to say, I am going to give feedback,
Hmm.
because anyone who is a product manager or who knows product managers knows like they live on feedback. That's how their world runs. And so um it
Feedback and
if you
unboxing.
are, yeah, if you're opting into betas and you're not giving PMs feedback, you should be doing that.
Mhm.
Find them and give them their feedback because they love it.
That brings me to something I've been kind of wondering lately. Like, there's obviously, I think we all have noticed, been a huge increase in how much they've launched over the last 6 months, whatever it is, in terms of
Mhm.
HubSpot, right? It kind of feels like there's something coming. Do you think that they're going to use inbound to release something big, something new? And if so, can you like read the tea leaves based on what they've been launching that might tell us something?
If you asked me that question 6 months ago, I would have been able to say absolutely without a doubt. But now I don't have a clear answer or even a speculation at this point because it truly is stuff across the spectrum. And if I had to venture even a guess, and it is completely a guess, is that it's not necessarily a new product or feature as much as it is going to be a new way to use these features. Where similar to how it's now pay by seat for some of the sales features, I'm wondering if that is going to start being a case for like all the products at all the tiers, where you can start paying by the seat for paying by the seat or paying by like small group of seats for products on not products but like features and functionality at like the pro level or at the enterprise level, or maybe even bringing some of the pro features down over onto starter, because I think a lot of the focus that's gone into HubSpot lately is it's shifted a lot more to being more on that enterprise side of things. It's a lot of throwing stuff in there. And the reason why, in my mind, is that 2 years ago, the huge emphasis on HubSpot was very small business and that very entry level market. It's hard to spend a lot of time, energy, and effort investing in tools and features for that are not necessarily available to your upmarket revenue share. And so I think there's been so many of these that have been built out on the enterprise level so that Cameron, your point earlier, where it's like, you start high and it trickles down. I think that's been a lot of the focus so that all of this has been to help those very small and those small business segments, but not immediately over time. You give all these to the enterprise features, enterprise accounts get really excited about them, are able to really capitalize on how to take most advantage about it. It grows their business. They're able to help provide real feedback to HubSpot to how to make these tools better. They then trickle down to the pro and the starter features. Users are then able to start utilizing them. And since they're more bootstrapped and not as able to make all these edits as, say, a team like, Rev Partners has a whole developer team plus a whole account management team, and, Deal Hub, I know, is similar kind of a thing. You're a one person shop, or even with a handful of people, you can't do that. But once it trickles down, people have already figured out how to do that. And so you can watch a how to and implement it yourself.
Yeah. I think looking at the way they're positioning inbounds, I think the tagline something like a place to grow or something like that for growers
Mhm,
growing. Um, and given all the features that have been coming out and the fire hose of shipping that's been going on, I
mhm,
have to think that it's going to be based on presenting themselves as a tool. The when you ask people at a bigger company what CRM you use, and they're just like, well, obviously Salesforce, and then you say, what about HubSpot? They'll say, oh, it can't support our use case, whatever that is. It's usually very vague. Like I've
mhm,
never gotten a straight answer. I think more and more they're making that an impossible argument. Like what is it
mhm,
specifically? And so I think the message going forward is like, yes, we take these small companies and we support you all the way to grow to like this size company and maybe feature some of the bigger enterprises. But like you said, you can't really hit that top tier revenue unless you support the higher end. Eventually, you need that. And I
exactly.
think they're doing it.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of that I'm sure manifests itself out of the conversations a while ago that were with Google that I know have changed over time. But I'm sure a lot of that was just to show the value there, because when when that started being rumored a couple years ago, my brain immediately went like, I it it makes complete sense, because you partner with Google and look at how many like smaller business and startups basically are just like, okay, I need to get started with my business. What are you going to pay for? Going on Google Workspace, and you're using that for like the core part of your technology stack. If you had HubSpot incorporated into that, it's like, okay, I now have all my business administration side of things as well as all of my inbound and outbound technology stack. And that's just I can see that being an immense value proposition for any small business.
Yeah, I'm very happy they did not go through with
I
it.
agree with you. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm not like it's the kind of scenario where like I'm very happy with that, because I think it's going to allow for a lot more innovation and variation. And I it's purely from the point of when that was announced. I was like, okay, I can understand where this fits in. I'm glad it didn't, but yes, I can understand where it fit
Yeah, yeah. I side as a user, as a someone in the orbit, as a very minor shareholder. I was
in.
very happy that it didn't happen because,
Yep.
like I said, I think HubSpot has been so innovative and is shipping in a way that only a startup ends up shipping, right? The cycle of shipping new features for Salesforce is on like a quarterly basis, right? They do like their
Mhm.
winter release or whatever. HubSpot, it's just it's just happening
As
constantly.
it's ready, yeah.
Yeah, and that is a unique feature that even as a relatively large company, they're able to do is something that they should you know really cherish because it's unique.
Hmm. Yeah, wholly agree.
My prediction is that going over into inbound and over the next 12 months, what we're going to see is a lot more connectivity of the data. And so we've seen, for example, that the prospecting workspace becomes the sales workspace. They release the service workspace. And I see these little hubs, these workspaces, as places for people to go and effectively do their job on a day-to-day basis. So you can log in, go to your workspace, and like that's the only screen you have to go to. And I don't think it's fully there yet. I don't know that anyone would argue that it is, where
Hmm.
sales reps are only going to the sales workspace and they're not going to any other screen. But I could see it getting to that point where an enterprise company, for example, says, I've got 100 sales reps. I want them to log into HubSpot, go to sales workspace, and that's it. And it would be an amazing thing for sales to do that. Marketing goes to their space, service goes to their space. And the day that finance gets a space, I'm sure they will be jumping for joy.
Hmm.
And if us RevOps and HubSpot admin folk get a super admin space, then that'll be the cherry on top. I'll take it.
Yeah. I I completely agree with you, and like a perfect, clear, easy example for that is just looking at the sales pipeline side of things and everything that's just like the quotes, for example. Yeah, you have finally been able to attach quotes over into the deal view, but it's something that is it took a while for it to get there, and even when it was there, it's buried. And when you actually go into the quote itself, like you just go to the PDF. And so like being able to expound on that would be huge. And I agree with you too, Cameron, for the RevOps side of things, and like the rev. Like I would extend it further, because bluntly, I don't like the term RevOps. I think it's just sales and marketing alignment, and in order to do that, you need to take into account other parts of the business. Your technology stack, your IT support, your accounting, finance, etc. So BizOps just feels more appropriate. But like whatever. But the takeaway there is like, what is one selling point that a lot of folks use when they're trying to get you to adopt HubSpot? It's mapping your tools and your technologies and your journey. That kind of feature does not exist in HubSpot right now, and so to your point of that whole like building up that RevOps model where you're trying to align sales and marketing, I think that's where the data attribution model is going. I think the intention behind that is so that you can pretty much say, all right, cool, I come in, you come in as a RevOps consultant. You essentially go, all right, here's how we're going to map out the journey for your business. We're going to build that into the data attribution model. And then within that data attribution model, you could then start building the individual subsegments within it to actually backfill that data and that functionality. So you're starting with the map first and then building things out instead of building things out left, right, center, and then trying to figure out how they connect later.
So here's a question then that comes off of everything that we just talked about, because
Yeah.
HubSpot has historically been very proud to be the all on one platform, not the all in one platform.
Hmm.
I think we're starting to see maybe a shift in at least the behaviors around that. But do you think that they're moving really more toward an all in one platform as they continue to adopt many of these features, which historically you would go to other elements like DocuSign and
Hmm.
PandaDoc, and I mean historically there were a lot of things that you would rely on third party apps for. Now you
Hmm.
can do it natively. What are your thoughts on that shift?
I think that there's going to be I think there's going to be a degree of that, but I don't think it's going to be a complete all in. And what I mean by that is where it makes sense, that's going to happen. So you use the DocuSign, for example. If you have your entire sales process built within HubSpot and you're already doing quoting and deals within there, I can understand how, all right, naturally you want to have signatures fully built into that too. That just makes sense to me. However, if you're doing other things like, you still need to manage your external like business operating stack, so like your Google Workspace or your Microsoft Office 365 or something like that. No, you're not going to, because you you can't even compare the two. They're completely separate and disjointed. And so, where I think the direction is going is if it directly relates to the product feature and the pipeline that is within the revenue or the business operations sphere, that's essentially help your business run. And it is a tool or feature that enables that, but is not a fundamental core component of it. Those features and tools, I think, are probably going to fall in there. But those core components will not, because bluntly, they can't. And a clear, easy example of that is you want to do image adding to a website or an email or whatever. You used to, long time ago, you had to either find it like stock footage, then you had Photoshop come in, Canva AI kind of started taking its place. Now you have an image generator built directly into HubSpot. Granted, I'm still going to use a third party tool to do it, but the fact that that image generator and the meta text and the other various different AI tools are built in there tells me that it's going more into that all in mentality.
Yeah. I actually think they are going to, because the trend, if you talk to people kind of in, at least in the SaaS space, you talk to people in RevOps, there's been this trend of consolidating tools. There was a time where every part of the go-to-market organization got its own, little tool they can use, and everyone, there was budgets were infinite. There's definitely a consolidation happening. And so, but it's not new. Like, think about the things that HubSpot has introduced, right? There was this big thing about drift for a while, right? And then HubSpot introduced its own kind of chatbot. It introduced video recording and coaching, right? They're taking the MVP of some of the most effective tools in their work, in their ecosystem, and adding it natively. And I think that'll continue. But like you said, it's like there's no huge magic in e-signature, right? Like
Mhm.
DocuSign did a very good job of gaining a huge amount of ground on something that's it's not that hard to do.
Mhm.
It gets much more complicated the more you need, pricing and calculating and all these things.
Mhm.
Just speaking from experience, but I think that the point solutions that people rely on today that are kind of very specific use case, generally potentially low cost. Those are ones that I think HubSpot is going to continue to add as native features, at least kind of at the minimum viable level.
Yeah, of course. That makes total sense to anyone that hears you saying that, because like talking about the consolidation of features you just mentioned, like that's key. That's a key point to me because again, most folks when you're adopting HubSpot, you're using two or three different tools simultaneously that all probably do the same thing. If your goal is to get into that very small business and that startup group, you want to provide as many of these features as possible in one tool and resource so that that doesn't happen. And if you're doing like business revenue operations effectively, you don't need to be reconciling that all the time and babysitting it. It should just be happening organically and naturally and to the point where you don't need an entire team dedicated to it. Because like if you want my perspective, I think business and revenue operations, like I think it's something that is absolutely needed right now. I think it came out of nowhere over the last like 12 to 18 months. I think it's going to be obsolete within the next 3 to 5 years because ultimately the intention is to streamline and optimize all these tools and resources. Once you've done that, it's done. Like you don't need to do it again. You just need to maintain it. And once you're maintaining it, you need to make sure that people are trained and educated to do so. And once that's put into place, like you're good. It becomes consulting and coaching at that point.
So
But
it's your
I'm
position
happy to
that
prove wrong there.
at some point in the future, business operations, revenue operations, you think will become obsolete, the way of the past, and it will be reliant on coaches and consultants
Oh
to
yeah,
drive minor updates.
absolutely. Because you look at that in any part of the equation, like when you have any kind of operations put into place, it's always a hard thing to do, and you need that third party eye to look at it and understand. Okay, what is wrong and how do I fix it? You put that into place, and then there's that friction of adoption. As people get more comfortable with it, it becomes more of just day to day life as long as you're providing that ongoing training, coaching, and documentation in order to provide that support. Once you've been doing it for like 6, 8, 9 months, it's second nature to you. And so I think the whole concept of RevOps is pretty much we're doing that en masse for all kinds of companies at all kinds of scales. Once that has become a lot more business as usual, you essentially just need like it's kind of like like a personal trainer mentality. It's like the first few months when you're working with a personal trainer, like you're getting so much coaching for like how much you should exercise, how you should be eating, and how you should be kind of building your structured routine throughout the day. A year later, if once you've kind of figured that out and been able to build that into your own system, you may not be using a personal trainer anymore. You may just be doing that yourself. And so I think it's a similar kind of mentality where you check in and your personal trainer just becomes your coach. You meet with once a week to make sure you're keeping accountable. But other than that, you're maintaining this on your own.
I
And
I would I would I would posit that maybe it's akin to somebody who wants to be an Olympian, and you've got your personal trainer, and you can get to the point where you don't need that personal trainer anymore, or you can go find an Olympic coach that's going to help you get to the Olympics. Which would be the difference in business between a company that's maybe become profitable and can manage themselves
mhm,
versus a company that becomes massive and says, okay, we're 500 million in revenue. How do we get to a billion? We're a billion in
mhm,
revenue. How do we get to 3 billion? So maybe that's the case. Maybe the roles shift and evolve. But hopefully, what I do think will happen is as HubSpot, in my opinion, evolves and becomes more and more complex as it is, uh,
mhm,
companies will need people that can continue to build business operations and revenue operations
mhm.
into the evolving software as it gets new features and updates.
Right.
Granted, if we get to a point 3 years from now where the release cycle is quarterly instead of
Every
daily,
other day without
uh,
you knowing.
yeah, things may slow down as far as
Right.
updating your CRM and your software, but that's where you may see likely more of a shift from HubSpot implementation into like business operations and business development, and there may become more of a divide between the roles. Whereas right now you have, I think, RevOps professionals who specialize in HubSpot administration and can do both. You
Hmm.
may reach a point at scale at enterprise where one person can't do, let me scale you from a 1 billion to a $2 billion company and let me do it all in HubSpot and I'm going to do it all myself.
Right. And I think that just kind of like that further accentuates the point of just like, I think that's the difference between like RevOps and like coaching and consulting is that like, you know, RevOps versus other kind of roles in a similar space is that you tend to be focused on that one. I don't want to call it a narrow window because it's not, because it's actually rather broad comparatively speaking. But you start getting, when you work with, I guess a better parallel is to like look at working with a freelancer versus a contractor versus a consultant. And your freelancer is where we were, and it's just like, okay, look, you're coming in and you're putting in like work time here and there to do what you're told, largely speaking. You have your contractor who's essentially doing that, but is in this extension of the team because they're doing that more long term. And then you have the consultant who's not really the boots on the ground, but who's actually coaching and educating you on here's what you need to do. And now this, yeah, here's what you need to do. Here's how to do it. And basically coaching the team on how to implement it. I think RevOps is very much. I think it's graduated from the freelancer to the contractor component, but I don't think it's at the consultant space yet. And so, getting to that consultant space is more what I was alluding to, where it's going to be obsolete. In that, instead of us coming here and saying, "Hey, look, here are the optimization areas for your business. We're going to build all that for you and coach you on how to do it." All of those are going to already exist, and it's going to be more in a, okay, your work, like when you work with us, it's pretty much here's what you need to change, here's what you need to optimize, here's what you need to incorporate, but I'm not rebuilding this from the ground up anymore because you've already done
I I
It's a hot
love it.
take. It's a hot take.
that. I'm
I love
I
it.
Yeah,
complete I
RevOps is
completely
going to
agree,
be
and that's
obsolete
fair.
in 3 to 5 years, but we'll see.
No, it's a great for this kind of conversation. So I'm very okay. I acknowledge this is entirely my perspective, and so I can see it
Yeah.
going different ways, and that's completely fine.
So I want to gather your thoughts on one more question before we end up rounding out the episode with,
Oh
again,
yeah.
inbound around the corner, shifting gears into thinking about not what is but what will be or what could
Hmm.
be. Um, if there was one speaker that could be keynoting for inbound, who would you want to take the stage? I'll give you guys a second to think about it. I'll give you my response first. I
Living
would
or
love to
dead or
see.
anybody in history, or do they have to be like an actual person alive today?
Ideally, someone alive, but if you have someone compelling that's
I don't
deceased,
know.
then
I
that will be
can't really think.
acceptable.
All right,
Yeah.
narrows it down a little bit. Okay.
Yeah. That's how.
I'll give an answer for both. Alive, I would say Howard Schultz because of what he's done with the Starbucks empire. I would love to see him speak, and I think he could just speak amazing things about taking a business and building it. And mirroring him would be S. Truett Cathy, founder of Chick-fil-A, because I don't even think I need to explain it, but I mean, their business is amazing. Their service is amazing. Both being in the food industry, and probably most people listening don't have direct takeaways for food, but the way that they both talk about building a business with passion and servicing the customer, I love the emphasis that both of them have put on
Mhm,
that side of the business. Whereas a lot of SaaS companies nowadays focus on new coming in,
mhm,
and a lot of them focus on how do we get people returning and coming back.
mhm.
It's hard to argue with either of them and their success. Brian, I'd love to
Yeah.
hear. You can give me one or two people, living or deceased.
Sure. Actually, like I'm sure that this answer may change, but honestly, the one that kind of came to mind right now, because my wife's been watching a lot of cooking shows, is honestly Gordon Ramsay would, I think, be a great speaker there because 20 years ago, no one had no one in the States really had heard of him. Like, he was a great chef, and then Hell's Kitchen happened. And the whole premise of that show was let me optimize your kitchen and get you so you're running like a well-oiled machine. And and it was very much boots on the ground, and you got that going, and then it flipped out, like restaurants kind of flipped over and got things squared away. And now there's all kinds of different cooking shows that are going into play where it's featured, where he's featured there, which is it's less about that and more coaching you and just like, okay, here's the challenge, you solve it, and I'll provide that advice and the pushing in order to get it better. And so just given that evolution of experience and brand, I think that's very analogous to where we currently are in just like this business operations space. And I think there's a lot of relatable ties that can be associated with
I was trying to think of an alternative to the one I have, because so it's devoid of any of this person's political machinations. But
it. Yeah.
I think Peter Thiel would be one for me.
Okay.
0 to 1 was like life-changing, like dispassionate, short, just to the point, and I think he clearly sees the world differently than all of us. And yeah, I would that would be interesting.
It's hard to, well, I don't want to say it's hard to make an argument against some of the people out there with brilliant minds. Yeah, I mean, I think a similar sentiment can be said, for example, Elon Musk, brilliant guy, obviously able to build successful businesses, whether you like him or not, whether you agree or disagree with the
Right.
way he does things. Not the purpose of this conversation, but there's a lot of people out there who are absolutely brilliant at what they do. There's a lot to learn from them. And for everybody listening, and for the three of us on here as well, really just name of our game is to keep learning, growing, evolving, and doing what we can to make things better for those we serve. Um, Brian, any final thoughts or words before we part on this episode of the Sprocket Pod?
Absolutely. And then, like, in all honesty, yeah, I nothing more to add. I think it was a great conversation. Definitely appreciated the the hot take, the debate, and thereabouts. I think it's a good chat. Like, starting from the original topic of objects, events, and properties, and evolving into what it ultimately became. Like, it just shows how quickly things can go from one stage to another. And so just being able to keep that straight, keep that aligned, and see through with that vision, that's the takeaway. And that's all that any of us are trying to do. So appreciate the time.
Yeah.
As the HubSpot CRM is always evolving, as is our conversation. Mark, thank you for being on with us today, as always. Brian, thank you for joining. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Sprocket Pod, we do these Fridays at 10:30 Central. We air them live, and then you can view all of our previous edited episodes on YouTube and Spotify. Again, you can also join us in the Sprocketeer community. If you're not in the Slack, make sure you join. Link is in the show notes. And if you aren't already checking out the HubSpot admin user group, they recently celebrated their 100th episode,
Mhm.
which Deanna Galoff and Kyle Jepson, they host that every single week. And they had Dharmesh on this past week, which was a really, really exciting
That was a
episode.
good
So
one.
huge congratulations to them. Make sure you check out their episodes. Again, link is in the show notes. Everyone, thank you for tuning in, and Sprocket on.
Have a great weekend, everyone.